Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here today. We are excited to have you all here for our best practices training, which is going to be covering Domestic Violence 101, safety planning, and human trafficking. Today, our guest hosts for today's session are Jasmine Pierce from the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence, otherwise known as CCADV, and the Connecticut Institute for Refugees and Immigrants, otherwise known as CIRI. We have Genesis Polanco. Thank you both for being here today. Just some quick housekeeping for everybody that's here. If you registered through someone else's account, for example, if I have like 17 John Does who are in the room with us today, that means that you registered with a different email address and you will not receive a copy of the documents that we will be sharing today. So if your name on screen is different from what your actual name is, then just do me a favor and put your email address in the chat so that I have it and I can include it in my list of distributions for people that were registered. All materials will be shared to those who are on my list of people that registered for today's session, including the recording, the slides that we'll be getting from Jasmine and Genesis, and anything else that may be related to today's session. The session will also be shared on Roundtable if you are a member there through our announcements and hub page, as well as our YouTube channel, and all of that will be sent to those registered on the list. If you have any questions throughout the session today, I've already checked in with Genesis and Jasmine, and both of them are perfectly okay with you guys interrupting them, typing your questions in the chat or in the Q&A feature, raising your hand, whatever feels best for you. Please use them. They're a fantastic resource while you are here with them. And then if there are any questions that maybe you come up with after the session, feel free to email me and I can pass those along to them as well. I think that is it for my housekeeping. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and turn it over to both Genesis and Jasmine. Thank you guys for being here today.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Yes, thank you for having us.
All right, let's get started. I'm just going to share my screen. All right, can everyone see my screen?
You're good to go.
Perfect. So like Lindsay said, please ask us questions, stop us as we're going through the slides. We want questions as much as possible. But again, I am Jasmine Pierce. I'm from the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence. So this is really just kind of a DV 101, kind of talking about like safety planning, really just how kind of what DV services are, what we offer, how the CANs and DV services kind of work together, a little bit of everything. So if anything comes up that you think of, stop me for sure. So kind of a little bit what we're going to go over. Again, you will receive these slides if I don't talk about every single point on here. So just a little disclaimer. Normally when we're talking about any domestic violence, we normally use she. Not saying domestic violence does not happen to others, but 85% are female clients that we do work with. So it's kind of just a norm for us to use she when we kind of give examples of situations that come up. So just a disclaimer that I wanted to give before starting. So what is domestic violence? It's really just a pattern of abusive behaviors between two people. Doesn't matter what the partners are. Something that really should be known around domestic violence is it does not have to be intimate partner violence. It can be family violence. That's something that a lot of people get confused around when they think of domestic violence. Intimate partner violence and family violence are domestic violence. So it can be physical abuse, sexual abuse, and any coercive control. It's a time where someone is really feeling scared or trapped in any way. It's harassing, threatening, strangling, and stalking. And those are all crimes in the state of Connecticut. So domestic violence is a pattern of behaviors. It's not just a single event. It doesn't happen just one time all the time. It can definitely escalate over time and really just happen kind of little by little. It can go from a very, very healthy relationship to a very, and quickly sometimes, unhealthy relationship. And there's definitely times where it can catch the victim off guard, where they may not even realize they're in a domestic violence relationship or in a situation, because again, we kind of talk about that family violence. They may not even realize they're in a domestic situation. So just kind of putting that out there, what domestic violence can look like, and understanding that it is 100% fluid. So methods of control. So we're going to talk more about these a little bit in detail, but they are physical and then sexual, and then kind of going into the emotional, technological, and financial. So we like to point these out to understand that domestic violence does not look the same for every client that we're dealing with. It doesn't look the way it used to look, I would say, back in the day. It is very different in the times today. So physical violence, I think this is the one that many of us think of right away. When you think of domestic violence, you think of the physical abuse. You think of seeing the bruises and someone being hit or punched or choked, but domestic violence is so much more than that. But this is one of the common ones. There's also sexual violence. So this can happen in marriages that a lot of people don't really understand or know. Taking someone's birth control is sexual violence. And of course, like date rape, drugs, demanding sexual photos. So all of this counts under sexual violence. And then going into the emotional. So this is, of course, what you're not able to see. So the isolation, blaming someone, ignoring them, criticizing them, the humiliation. So those behaviors that someone's just feeling, and how do you explain that? So when you're doing an intake with someone, these are the situations where it becomes challenging when they're just really trying to explain a feeling, and they start to question, really, is this domestic violence? Is what I'm feeling valid? And as an advocate, it's really our job to validate those feelings and let them know, like, yes, what you're going through and what you're experiencing is 100% domestic violence. So if you're working with someone who is just kind of explaining like certain of any of these topics, understand that those are signs of possible domestic violence. Technological. So this can look, I've had clients that have had trackers on their vehicles, so the GPS trackers, and for many of them, they don't even know it. It can be monitoring their social media. It can be having tracking apps on their phones, and most of them do not know that that even exists. It can even be just kind of demanding check-ins. So let me know where you're at all times. Let me know when you get there. How long are you going to be there? When are you coming home? Really just that overall control of through, their phone or through social media, through family. That's another one, contacting their family member through social media and through their phone, and just monitoring all communication.
Jasmine, what would you say is the prevalence now of the technological abuse in the last, say, 3 or 4 years compared to prior, like the last decade?
So in regards to stats, I don't have numbers, but I do know the youth population is where we're seeing that most, of course, because of social media.
Right.
So social media, the stalking, people are not realizing how often their location is on. And so one of the things that when we talk about safety planning, before coming into any of our programs, that is the first thing we ask for, is your location off? And as advocates, a lot of people don't know how to even search for their location. So that's something kind of important if you're working with anyone, the location.
Yeah.
And then when you think about the youth, their social media, like posting where you're at all times. That's, the hot thing. And
Snapchat had a feature for that too,
yes,
right? Where you would share your location, they can see you on the map willingly.
and literally, if you zoom in, you can see up until the house that you're at,
Wow.
as close as that. So I think that is the most dangerous part when you think of how detailed social media can get in that location feature on the phone. And it takes quite a bit of research to really go through your phone and find that that part in there.
Wow. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Another big one that we're really seeing, I would say more in like our housing and shelter, is around the financial abuse. I don't think people realize how big of an issue this is. Something that I've done when I was in shelter is, when's the last time you looked at your credit? And then really having that client look at the credit and realizing the person causing abuse has taken out credit cards in their name and ran them up, or a client not even being able to have access to their own money. So what people sometimes don't realize is you might have a client who makes, let's say, 80,000, 90,000 a year, but they have no access to their bank accounts. They have no access to their debit cards. So that is a sign of financial abuse. And that does come up. Or their credit is just so bad, and now it's hard to look for housing or try to get an apartment. And that is something that we see often. So it's just working with clients to kind of build their credit back up and get back to a place where they can now be successful again. So this is one that does come up a lot. And we kind of talk about that change, the change in what DV used to look like versus now. It's not all the bruises of what you used to see, but thinking of the emotional, the stress that comes to it. Also thinking of financial, if the person causing abuse is forcing a client now to go to court over and over again, or coming to their job to the point where they are getting fired or having to call out all the time, and now they lose their job, that is also part of that financial abuse. So these are just signs of other types of abuse, aside from the common ones that we really think about when you first think of domestic violence. And when we do our intakes, we really do have those questions, and we do screen for all types of domestic violence. We don't just look for that danger in regards of, is it physical? We really do take into consideration all types, because they are all just as dangerous. And there's no one over the other, because at any point, anything can happen. So we have to take in consideration all of them equally. So this is just a list of really just red flags. Some clients, they, like I said before, they may not even realize they are in a situation, whether it's family or intimate partner. But it's just kind of thinking about it. What has been going on? This might be like a friend of yours, and just they're telling you these stories, and just kind of having it in the back of your mind, like, oh, well, you said this happened. Oh, well, you can't go out. Oh, you have to check in. And just hearing those things kind of on repeat. So that's what we call like the red flags. So overall, I think we kind of see this with a few different things, but complexities of domestic violence, of course, substance use. So we see that to 40 and 60% more for IPV incidents. Of course, if weapons are involved, you're going to see a lot more violence. And then if there's any behavioral health, 20% more if there's behavioral health. So just wanted to give a little bit of those stats to just kind of, for you all to just know. So for warning signs, I'm not going to go through, some of these are a little bit wordy, so I promise I'm not going to go through every single one. But warning signs, so people who are being abused, you might realize they are afraid or kind of anxious all the time around certain people. Realize they might not go certain places without their partner or feeling like they can't go certain places. They might be getting like frequent phone calls all the time from their partner and just scared at all times. You might realize their partner is always jealous or has like a short temper and making excuses for them. That is a huge kind of red flag. And again, they might not realize it, but being the outsider, you might catch those red flags. Other things is if they're wearing certain things when it's 90 degrees outside, I don't think you and I will be wearing gloves and a scarf or a hat. I think there's certain things that, considering the weather, you just wouldn't wear. Most times they're hiding bruises. So you want to take those things into consideration and kind of look at that as well. And I think our doctors, and we have a health provider here who is really good at talking to doctors and educating them around this. Also, if they're missing like work and school and just important special occasions. So birthdays for family members or just outings that they will normally never miss, spending time with their friends. But now you're realizing they're no longer attending those things. So just things to kind of keep in mind. So something that comes up quite often is around why people do not leave. So this is probably the one question that you do not ask a victim of domestic violence. There's many, many reasons why people do not leave. And to ask someone that question is really turns into victim blaming. But most people, they do not want to leave the relationship. They really just want the violence in the relationship to stop. For a lot of these situations, they go into the relationship where things were perfect, where they were happy. They were both happy. There was no violence. And over time, things have changed. And a lot of the victims go back to, I just want things to be the way they used to be. And that is the hope. That is what their dream is. So they don't leave. But there's a lot of reasons. There's children involved sometimes, financially. A lot of us know around housing, it's very hard to just start over again. We have some clients who are, let's say, stay-at-home parents or have been with their partner for 30 years and maybe they did not go to school or maybe they were not able to work during that time. Or again, just stay-at-home parents, so they just did not work by choice. And now you're asking them to leave and start over. They're going to have a lot of challenges in this field, trying to get a job or find an apartment when they have no rental history. So there's a lot of reasons why people do not leave. And sometimes leaving makes a situation very, very dangerous. So just being very careful to how that's worded on why people choose to stay or choose to leave. And just realize there's a lot more that goes into it. And so that's kind of where we'll talk more about safety planning. So I kind of touched on this, just it does make it much more dangerous when people do leave. So safety planning is very, very important. And we will share this. So easy leaving is not a simple decision at all. There's a lot that goes into it. Not everyone wants to be in communal living and go to a safe house or a shelter. Not everyone has the supports of family and friends. Some people don't always live in Connecticut and can just pick up and move to a friend's house or their mom's house. There's, again, a lot that is really to put a thought into it, it might take 6 months to decide to leave. And that's kind of where the DV advocates come in, where they're working with this client to kind of come up with those alternative plans and come up with the next steps.
Do you have any data or even just ballpark estimations is fine of maybe how many people will leave and say come to your organization and start to work with you, but then unfortunately go back because they were convinced or they changed their mind, or how often does that happen?
So I do not have exact numbers.
Yeah, in your
Um,
experience.
I was gonna say, in my experience, unfortunately, I can tell you, just thinking of clients I've worked with in housing. So let's say I've had 10 people in housing. So the rapid housing person, the rapid housing program, when I was the advocate, there might have been 4 that were just not ready and would return back home. And I think ultimately that's what happens. They're just not ready, and that's okay. And as a system, we are well aware that sometimes it's just not a good time to leave.
Mhm.
And it could be sometimes DCF is involved, sometimes the court systems are involved,
Mm,
police, just legal stuff going on. Family is a huge part of why people go back. Religion is a big piece.
yeah.
Just culturally, it's not okay to get a divorce, or their pastor is saying, no, we can work through it and work on things and get back together. Um, so there's a lot of reasons why people go back.
It's so complex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's expensive. To be a single parent, most of them realize after a while they can't afford everything by themselves. And if the person causing abuse was the financial person and they choose not to go and pay child support or alimony, because again, now we're going into that financial abuse and they have full control, which is what they want, they will return. So just kind of ballparking it of what I've experienced with kind of like 10 clients at a time. On average, like 4 would go back and they might come back into the system again. And this time they might feel ready and be able to be successful in the program that second time. But I will say on average, the number that we teach and we kind of train around is on average, it takes up to 7 times for a victim to actually leave.
Wow. I was just going to ask
Yeah,
you, like,
same. I was just gonna ask. I'm like, I think is it 7 or 9?
It's
I always
7,
forget.
yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So that's the average to actually leave. And that's something
wow.
we're always training around, that it's okay that if they return, they might come to shelter and leave the next day. Because it was, an impulse where they just, in that moment, just felt it was time for them to go.
Yeah.
And then they decided, like, I want to go back home. And that's okay. And then 2 weeks later, they might change their mind again. And it's just continuing to work with them and put all the resources in place up to what the client wants. That's the most important piece. Like, we are always working on client-centered approach and trauma-informed and really just what they want in that moment. It's not up to us to make that decision. It's really up to when they're ready and at what point.
Mm. Thank you.
So I'm sure you all know about Category 4. So Category 4 is fleeing domestic violence. So they can be in shelter or safe house. They can be staying with family and friends in the community, in a hotel, temporary staying, or wherever their situation is. But they are all considered fleeing based on their situation. So they can be fleeing domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, just not having the resources.
Just
So
really quickly, for anybody who's on here who might not touch housing directly, category 4 specifically is the category of your type of homelessness that you present as when you enter our system. So if you come in, we typically, if you're a part of the continuum of care and you're receiving funds for like rapid rehousing or something, you're looking at category 1, which means that you are literally homeless, or category 4 is usually included as well. So if you're fleeing domestic violence or any associated type of violence. Trafficking, I think, sometimes is excluded under the HUD categories, unfortunately. But category 4 is specifically like a status of your homelessness type.
Yes. So I think what's great about category 4 is kind of always what I want to point out is for the category 4 clients is that they can be staying with their family and friends in the community and still have that category 4 homeless. And for us, it's around like that diversion piece of it, because we just don't have enough shelter beds, or they might have somewhere they can stay just for a short time until we're able to help with kind of getting those pieces in place. So that's what I love about category 4 when we kind of talk about like that homeless status.
Yes, and I'll touch on it a bit. We are subcontracted by CCADV, serious, so we can house victims who are fleeing or attempting to flee trafficking under this category, and then place them in rapid rehousing.
Great.
So safety planning. So many of you, I don't know where like agencies that you all come from, but I'm sure at some point you might come across a victim or a survivor at any point. So I think it's important to kind of talk about safety planning and what that can look like, and just understanding that there's many pieces to safety planning. And the most important piece around this is safety planning is fluid. It's an ongoing process. The real goal around safety planning is to not have threat or harm to the actual client, but we also have to go at the client's pace of whatever they want. As a advocate, it's not up to me to create that safety plan, because I don't know the person causing abuse. I don't know what they're capable of. I don't know really anything about them aside from what the victim is telling me. So it's really going by what they say is best in that moment and what's going to help them move forward for, if they're individual or if they have children. When children get involved, safety planning looks very different. You have to think about the school system and getting the school involved. You have to think about grandparents and if DCF is involved. Like, there's so many moving pieces to it at that point. So just kind of giving a little bit more details around safety planning if and when you do come in contact with a victim. So most important, it's not our plan. It's very survivor-centered. It's really on their needs. Something that has come up over the years is I've always heard this term, like, are you clearing someone for safety? This is like really just a 2-on-1 term. So I always like to clear this up. As a DV advocate, we cannot make that assessment. We cannot clear someone for safety. That is not our role or our job in any way. What we can do, and what we will always do as a DV advocate, is safety plan. We will always safety plan to the best of our ability. But again, remembering it is survivor-centered. So what does safety plan mean to them? And it's going to look different for every client. So if they say, like, I want to work, or I'd rather be in a homeless shelter and I do not want to be in a safe house, that is completely up to a client. We cannot make that decision and say, well, you are clear for safety, because I cannot tell any of you or a friend that you are going to be safe the next day. Like, I don't know what's going to happen to anyone, but we all do our best to be safe every day. And as an advocate, that's exactly what I would do for a victim. I would do my best as an advocate to make sure they are safe every day, whatever that means to them.
When they ask you that question, are they asking you that to determine whether or not they are a threat to people around them because of their presence in a shelter, for example?
I have yet to figure out why that question and where it came from.
Okay.
So if someone can tell me where that question came from, I would love to know.
I would think the question comes to just confirm, like you said, that they're not at jeopardy and the other individuals within the shelter
Not in imminent danger.
are not in a minute. Yeah, I mean, as a previous shelter provider, that's why I used to ask the question, because if we knew that there was a issue, we would want to make sure that they're cleared first. So I know that that is a absolute common question that you probably get asked a lot.
I was guilty of asking that question as well when I operated a shelter. I will admit.
So my goal by the end of the year is to break this word. And I say that, and it's really because one, as a coalition, we do not use imminent danger anymore. That is just a word we can't use for like funding. We just can't use it. So we don't use imminent danger. So to have another system use it, it really does like conflict kind of with our mission overall. But again, like we safety plan. So we really leave it up to the client. So I think kind of the questions around like, are there concerns? We have to ask the client. And if the client tells us no, that's all I have to go by. I can't put my personal feelings into it. I can have a conversation if there's a release of information. We can have that conversation together, but I can't provide a personal feeling. So to clear someone is really a personal feeling if the client is saying, I'd rather be in this system. So that's kind of where the issues come into place.
Right.
So again, working with the client as an advocate, we're always going to do our best. We're always going to make sure the boxes are checked because we have funders. We have to make sure our job is done, the same way you all have funders. And there's certain services that just have to be in place. So we're going to do our part as well.
It seems like a good opportunity to have conversations between the two systems
Yes.
that are at play as well around appropriate use of language. There is a question in the chat that says, can you explain the reasoning behind no longer using the term imminent danger and what should be used instead?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a new thing kind of for us within the system as well. But the reason for it is kind of going back to what we talked about in the beginning, is the imminent danger is going to kind of look different for everyone. So physical abuse versus financial abuse, that is two very different situations. Someone who's experienced financial abuse might not be in what we would have considered imminent danger 2 years ago, but in a split second, that can change. And we don't want to be liable for that change if we're saying, well, this person's not in danger because it's just financial abuse. So that's why it's just equal. Everyone is equal as we take the intake, and it's case by case at all times. Every scenario that comes in is always going to be case by case and what the situation is at that moment. I think situations that come up is, well, what if someone's coming from another state? Well, let's have that conversation. Regardless if the person is in this state or not, they're still fleeing DV. So they might not be in danger, but they're still fleeing DV. So we still have to do our part. So I think it's just coming. So again, as a system, we're still trying to figure out, how do we, I would say like scale it, but we don't want to be liable for something happening to someone because we put a safety level on it.
Right.
So that's really why we do not use that anymore.
It's a very important talking point. That's something that I think, we can discuss offline about figuring out a way to maybe message that throughout the systems that are working together. Because if you guys are we're using different language clearly, right?
Yes.
We are looking for different things than maybe you guys are trying to do, and you're trying to be the best advocate that you can, but you have a shelter provider like myself 5 years ago, or someone else who's like, well, are they in imminent danger? And it's like, well, what does that mean, right? I think that is something that needs to be an ongoing conversation with the two systems for sure.
And I was the advocate and be like, and I'm sorry, what does cleared mean? Are you cleared for safety? Am I cleared for safety? Like, what if I get into a car accident? Does that mean I'm cleared for safety? I was definitely that advocate. I will tell you that pushed back. So sorry if I talked to any of you in the past. I apologize. But I was the advocate. Did you say there was another question? I can't see.
I think that was the only one, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
But yeah, so I think this is a growing conversation.
Mhm.
Just because there's going to be a lot of changes just within our system over time. So definitely we'll talk more. So going into like safety planning, 3 types of safety planning. You have the in the moment, right now, what do I do safety planning? So calling the police, finding somewhere to go right now, calling a DV program. What do you need to do right now? Get connected with someone. Then you have your short term. So what that might be like staying with a family member for a short time, really kind of what I talked about with the kids. That's a big one, kind of planning around that. Maybe you're going to stay in the house and work with a DV counselor for a bit, to kind of figure out those next steps. Like you're realizing things are getting bad, but you don't want to leave yet. So kind of figure out what those next steps are. And then you have your long-term safety planning. And it's really like, okay, I know I'm kind of ready to leave the relationship. Let's start talking about changing your bank information. Maybe you guys have a joint account, but let's talk about slowly separating that without this other person noticing. Let's talk about slowly collecting all your documents. We know one big thing is when you have the short term, let's go to DV program. A lot of people come into shelter and they don't have their birth certificates and socials because they're just leaving. And then it really puts a hold on trying to collect all those documents again. So when you think of long-term, it's let's collect all that identifying information for all household members. Is the court involved? Maybe you're going through a divorce, that child support, alimony, whatever it is that you need. That's really that long-term planning. What are going to be the next steps long-term? So those are really kind of the 3 safety planning types that we do. Normally when you think of that quick, like Safe Connect, 211 calls, that's that first part of it. That's probably more of what everyone's seeing in the moment crisis. So kind of exactly what you brought up, Lindsay, also, which I feel like is so important. So like how DV and the CANs can work together. One thing that comes up a lot is the ones that come from other states. And what does that look like? I've trained with a lot of the CANs recently, and they're like, well, this person came from another state and worked the DV program saying they're not fleeing anymore because they came from another state. I think it all comes down to conversation. If you're working with someone, unfortunately, DV programs cannot accept third-party releases of information. So you do have to either call with the client into Safe Connect or have the client call the Safe Connect or the DV program directly and complete a release if you would like to be a part of that conversation. But I think it comes down to really just conversations. And again, those case by case. What exactly caused the homelessness? What exactly caused the fleeing, or what really happened on why you went from one state to another, and how we can work together in systems. If you're working with a client and they're in your shelter and the DV is happening, call us. Like, how can we work together? That's like the most important thing. So just give us a call. Really understanding that it's client choice. Some clients, despite what DV is happening, they really choose not to be in our programs. They just do not want to work with a DV provider. And it could be shame. It could be they just don't believe the DV is happening or don't believe they're in a situation. And that is also possible. So again, client choice, we can't tell someone they're a victim. We have to wait until they're ready, regardless of what we know. And, we sit in these trainings, but we can't tell somebody they are a victim of DV. And then some people, they'd rather be in a shelter versus a safe house. Our rules around confidentiality are pretty strict, where you can't have someone picking you up. So if they don't have a car, that might be harder for them. Some of our safe houses are in rural areas where there is no public transportation, where it is pretty hard to get to and get around, where they may not want to be there. And that's kind of where we can work together. And it is possible where a client can be in a homeless shelter, but also receive all DV services. They can receive DV counseling. They can receive rapid rehousing through DV housing. So all of those things can be happening at the same time. So I think that is just a very important piece, that both programs really can work together. Again, if there's a release and if the client is willing. That's the most important part here, is they have to be willing to work with both programs. And
or I wanted to point, we also had clients that refused both a shelter and a safe house. She wanted to stay in her car because she felt safer there. She didn't want to be in the shelter and the safe house. Again, she's like, oh, I want my phone. Like, there's a lot of restrictions and in the safe house. And it was winter. And then as a case manager at the time and our organization, we always think about safety and trying to separate our, like Jasmine said, our feelings from it, because we're like, it's cold outside, sleeping in your car is not safe, things can happen, and something did happen. And then we, again, all we can really do during that period of time while we found a unit through rapid rehousing was just continue the safety plan and then offer the resources and offer, okay, you want to call 211 again? Maybe we can see if a shelter. No, and she still refused until she was housed in her own unit. So I can understand also how it can be difficult for an advocate or case manager to work with a client that prefers to be out either in the streets or in a car instead of a shelter or safe house.
Wow.
So again, this information will be given. This is really just around like Safe Connect. That's really the first point of contact. If you come across working with a client or you as a provider, if you just have questions, feel free to contact Safe Connect at any point, and just ask. Of course, if it's about a client in particular, we cannot provide that information. But if you just want general knowledge, feel free to give us a call. So this information will be shared. Same here. And then just kind of wanted to give overall what our services provide. So counseling, support groups, emergency shelter. I do like to point out that overall for our emergency shelters, we only have about 230 beds for the whole state.
Wow.
So I like to point that out because we get a lot of pushback. Like DV always says they're full, but 230 beds for a whole state is not a lot.
It's not
for a full state.
No, I didn't know it was that little.
Yes. So I promise you, we are telling the truth when we say we are full. I promise. But it's about 230 beds. It might be 237 but we're gonna say about 230. And we are always over capacity. So I do like to point that out. And this is just kind of a map of where all of our programs are at. Well, the towns are at, of course. And just looking at the distance, if you have a client that's in the Hartford area and the only available space is in Stanford and they don't have a vehicle and their kids have school, they are not going to want to probably go that far. So it's really thinking about all of those things. And that might be a client that says, well, I don't want a DV shelter. I'd rather be in a homeless shelter for those things because we just wouldn't have the space. And it's those situations that kind of come up where working together and kind of communicating is the most important piece. But yes, it's a small amount. It's very little. I wish we had more sometimes, but very little.
We need definitely more.
Yes, and then another piece is some of our programs are dual programs, so they work also with the sexual assault. And then like even with like CIRI, we take some of their clients sometimes if needed. So our beds are also split with most other programs too.
Well, they're very specific. So when we have a trafficking survivor who's not also a domestic violence survivor, they can't go into a domestic violence safe house. So then that's when other resources have to come into play. So then we think about, are we able to then hotel them, which is something that we really don't like to do because we would rather them be in a safe house or a shelter where there's staff on site that can support the survivor. But when that's the last resort for us, then that's where we would have to then place them in a hotel and then try to do one where it has like a kitchen and fridge. So they feel like it's like a little like studio apartment.
Yeah. So of course, safety planning, court advocacy, we have a rapid housing program information. And then just one thing, and I think pretty sure this is the last thing, and then I'm passing it off to CIRI, is I just want to put out, our programs do not work with offenders. So if someone calls and they are an offender, we just, again, by funding, we cannot work with them. And this has come up recently in a few different cans that I've worked with. Clients will call for shelter, but they are in our system as an offender. So we will refer them to a 1, and then we'll get pushed back. Like, you can't refer this person back, but it's because they are in our offender and we cannot disclose that. So just kind of thinking about that, we do not work with offenders. So that is why some people are pushed back. And it's not that it could be a dual arrest. Dual arrest, we will 100% work with. It's they are the abuser in our system. So I like to make that noted for most people. But of course, if there's any questions for me, definitely in the chat. And Genesis, I'm passing it off to you, and you should have access.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's see. Before I move on, it says, which programs do work with offenders?
Well, I'm sorry, what was the question?
Which
So-
programs do work with offenders?
No, we do not work with offenders.
Are there any programs that you are aware of
No.
that do?
No, our funding does not allow that.
Okay. So as Lindsay mentioned, my name is Genesis.
There must be some reentry program that would, if people get caught out and they're arrested, that would do the counseling and everything if they are offenders.
Oh yeah, I'm sure there's re-entry programs. I was just in regards of domestic violence, like sheltering, and counseling services through us. Like CCADV wouldn't work with any offenders.
So no one in your network. So you guys would
Yeah.
typically refer back out to 211, and then it would be up to 211 to figure out, is there a
Right.
reentry program? Is there some other homeless program or anyone else be willing to work with them? I think in those situations too, it depends on the class of offender and everything else as well.
Yes, so as Lindsay mentioned, I am Genesis Polanco. I am the program director for Project Rescue at the Connecticut Institute for Refugees and Immigrants, also known as CIRI for short. And we're also subcontracted by CCADV for rapid rehousing. So I oversee our anti-human trafficking program, unaccompanied minors program, rapid rehousing, and VOCA. And today I'm just going to touch a bit on human trafficking and how to understand and recognize the signs, and then where to connect the client for services here at CIRI. So the objectives for today, again, is just to familiarize participants with human trafficking, understand how to recognize the signs of trafficking, and then review the services that we have here at CIRI. So in recent years, there has been a lot of conversation about trafficking, which is great because it's definitely raising awareness on the matter. There's been a lot of articles on the media. There has been movies that have come out, and with that also comes a lot of like stereotypes and misconceptions, which is why it's important to just kind of like touch on what trafficking actually is and what it can look like, and then what can you do if you do come in contact with someone that is a potential victim or a survivor. So human trafficking, it's the traffickers use they use the force, fraud, or coercion in order to exploit their victims. So a lot of the times when thinking about trafficking, they, again, going back to media, they think they have to be somewhere chained up, it has to be international, they have to be transported. We work with a lot of immigrant and refugee clients. So when they think about an undocumented individual, they think of, oh, they were smuggled into the United States, therefore it's trafficking. And that's not necessarily the case, because there's two separate crime. With smuggling, they are basically doing a business transaction with, let's say, someone like a coyote. So they're paying a fee in order to be transported from their home country into the United States. That's very separate from trafficking, because trafficking is a crime against the individual, whereas smuggling is a crime against the border. So that's something that we like to make that distinction, Because again, when they're working with an undocumented client and then they hear like, oh, they pay a coyote to come into the United States, and they think it's automatically trafficking, which is not the case. So basically, it's the illegal exploitation of human beings is a crime against the person, not the border. And then another point that I wanted to make about that is it's highly profitable and relatively low risk, because you can basically sell the substances. They say you can sell drugs and arms multiple times. I mean, sorry, once. And then the client or the person can be exploited in multiple different ways. Now, thinking about a person that's under 18, so the minor is a victim of, let's say, a commercial sex act, regardless of the use of force, fraud, or coercion, they are a victim of human trafficking. So under the federal law, there's two severe forms of trafficking in persons. They have sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Client or victim can be, they can be a victim of both sex or trafficking. When you're thinking of sex trafficking, normally, let's say a person would think exchange of money for sex, but it can be an exchange of anything that has to do with value. So if you exchange material goods, if you exchange food, if you exchange housing, in certain cases, if there's like substance use in exchange for sex, and that can be considered sex trafficking. When it comes to labor trafficking, is again using force, fraud, or coercion in order to obtain services, labor, and I'll go a little bit more into what areas we have seen that in the past. Okay, now in terms of tactics that are used to exploit someone, what we've seen and the clients that we've served here at CIRI, when it comes to force, there can be physical restraint or harm. Again, not thinking of, oh, they've been chained up in a basement or in a cage. There has been sexual assault or abuse. They have witnessed violence. There's a lot of monitoring or confinement to control the victims. So if they are, let's say, not able to speak freely on the phone or come and go as they please. In forms of fraud, there has been like false promises, either in a relationship, immigration status, or economic opportunities. So they will say like, oh, you know, like if you come to this country and then I'm going to give you this particular job and this is what the pay is going to be like. But then again, when they come and they start working, that job is not necessarily what they had originally agreed to. So there's like that unexpected changes in the work hours, the pay, or the nature of the relationship changes, whether it's with the employer or the partner that they might be with. And then with coercion, there's threats of harm, psychological manipulation. We see a lot of document confiscation, especially if they're undocumented, or they come in with some sort of like passport, or they do have a visa. The employer or the person that brought them in to the United States might confiscate those documents, so then they don't have anything to show if they have legal status or not. And then a lot of fear of deportation. So what that looks like is you need to do X, Y, and Z, or I'm going to call the police and have you arrested and deported or sent back to home country. Or also threats of harming those who are back home. You know, if you don't work for me during this time, then I'm going to have someone harm your family or friends back home. So where does trafficking happen? Again, it can happen anywhere. So when it comes to like the global statistics, I don't know the exact stats for that, but basically there's a lot of conversation about sex trafficking, specifically child trafficking. And a lot of people assume that there's more sex trafficking happening, when in reality, there's more labor trafficking happening, because anywhere that work happens, trafficking can happen. A lot of, throughout the time that I've been here at CIRI, most of my clients in the past have been victims of labor trafficking. It could be one or the other, but mostly labor trafficking. And it's because it's happening in restaurants, bakery, construction, landscaping, sometimes in a lot of domestic servitude. So in the home, like let's say they're doing a nannying job or housekeeping, or like they're cooking for the family and cleaning. There's a lot of situations that are happening here in Connecticut around labor trafficking, but people don't think that's happening because, again, in the media, what they see is just sex trafficking happening, or the victim being transported to a country internationally and being sold.
Yeah, I never would have guessed that labor trafficking was higher than the sex trafficking.
Oh yeah, I'll look for the exact percentage and I'll send it over to you just as so you can know. But even just internally at CIRI, our labor trafficking clients numbers are way higher than the sex trafficking.
Wow.
And then who is involved in the trafficking? So again, I keep going back to the media because they make it seem as something like it's a stranger, is some organized crime organization or gangs. And we're not saying that it's not happening, but traffickers are often known to the victim. So a lot of the times is their own family, is their own partner, is their own friends or peers, is their own employers. So it's not like a strange man that just snatched you or put like a zip tie in your car to like target you. It's normally people that the victim knows. Would you say
most of the labor trafficking victims you see are undocumented?
so? Yes, I would say maybe also because of the agency that I work for, we do have an immigration legal services department. So a lot of the clients that we do receive referrals for are undocumented, and they came in for consultation. And then again, they basically talked about, this situation is happening to me. It's not what I had agreed. It's not a good situation. I'm going through a difficult time. They don't come in and say, oh, I'm a victim of labor trafficking. The attorney then sort of screen the client, talk to them, ask lots of questions about the work environment. What were you promised? What do you have to do? If you get hurt, are you able to go and get medical care? And that's sort of how she's able to screen and see like, okay, so this is not just a bad situation. You're actually being exploited. You're in a labor trafficking situation at work. But again, it happens mostly to undocumented, but it can happen to anyone. And that's my next point in terms of victims mean no single profile. Oftentimes we think like, oh, traffickers, it's other people, it's immigrants, it's sex workers, it's people who are in high risk situations, when in reality, it can happen to absolutely anyone. We serve all survivors of trafficking. So we see women, men, children, immigrants, citizens, basically anyone. So again, because traffickers could be anyone and so can be a victim, is okay, so how do we recognize the signs? They always say, oh, human trafficking is hidden in plain sight. And the reason why they say that is because it can be happening at the places that you go to have dinner with your family. But you don't know exactly what's going on behind closed doors. So in terms of I wanted to point just methods of control. Traffickers exploit their victims' vulnerabilities. So a lot, like the use of force, fraud, or coercion, these are some of the things that they do in order to exploit their victims. So it's about confiscating their documents, physical harm or threats, using debt. With labor trafficking, a lot of the things we're seeing in our program is like that debt bondage. And what that means is if they agree to pay, again, it's like a business transaction. They agree to pay, let's say, $7,000 to come from their home country to the United States. And then when they come to the United States and they find themselves where the traffickers then start adding these fees. And it's like, well, you actually have to pay for these other things that were never agreed to upon when the transaction was original, when they originally talked about the travel fees. Then basically they would say, you have to work at this farm in order to pay off this debt that you have. So they start working, and then they start working these long, extensive hours with sometimes they have no breaks, they have no days off. The conditions are horrendous. And then they'll say, they paid the X amount of money, and then the debt doesn't seem to be going down. So it's like a never ending cycle where the victim at this point is working to pay off this debt, but then they never finish paying it off, and that's that debt bondage. And there's actually like a huge case that recently happened in Hartford, and we did collaborated with the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office because of a lot of clients that came forward and they were in this debt bondage situation where they agreed to pay a fee and then it never ended, and they were working in these horrendous conditions.
How
and we were
often
able
do you guys have to work with like the FBI and other US agencies?
Yeah, very often. We get a lot of referrals from them. So the victim specialist from the U.S. Attorney's Office refer over for case management and immigration legal services. With the FBI, once they do start the legal proceedings, the attorney also works with the FBI to get that interview in order to process their application for the T visa, which is a trafficking visa. So we always look to them, and they also look for us for support when it comes to case management and also like the basic needs. And housing is a huge one as well, which is why we're very grateful that we're able to work with CCADV and rapid rehousing, because there's not a lot of resources for undocumented clients when it comes to housing. So we have them referred to us in order for us to help them with housing while that case is going and their immigration status comes through. And then in terms of red flags or indicators, these are just some things that I wanted to mention. When you do come in contact with a client that you might think is a victim of trafficking, these are some things that you can look for. So if the person lacks control, are they monitored at all times? Are they not allowed to speak for themselves? We do work with a lot of clients who speak a different language, but we have interpreter services available that we can use. So if we are working with a client and they have someone that comes along supposedly for interpretation, we like to say that, you know, we'd rather use our own, so then we can have a time alone with the client and be able to actually go through the intake with them and see if there's any red flags or if they are in a trafficking situation at the moment. We also look at like their demeanor. Are they unable or unwilling to speak with you? Are there gaps or inconsistency in their stories? Limited freedom of movement. We often see if they live and work in the same location. I'm not saying that there's not jobs that are, you know, like a homemaker or a nanny. There's jobs that are okay with that, but what we've seen is if they're not able to answer the phone or meet with you at a certain time. So what we've had in the past is clients where they say, oh, actually, I can't speak with you right now. Can you, and it will be like a very specific time frame for them to talk to you, or they have to meet you at a specific location, or they cannot come to the office. So that's when we say limited freedom of movement, that they cannot come and go as they please. And if there's like a lot of security measures also in where they live and work, like there's cameras everywhere and they don't feel safe, or that they can basically speak freely. And then when it comes to labor trafficking, looking at the work and pay conditions, which is again asking, are they getting paid hourly, or are there salary deductions? Are they taking away any of their funds to pay off a debt that supposedly they had?
How many different languages are you guys able to accommodate when doing translation?
So we use it's called Propio. That's the app service that we use. So we're able to basically get an interpreter on demand. Either it could be like a Zoom, like a virtual meeting, or it could be over the phone. And right now, yeah, they have hundreds of languages there.
That's great.
Yeah, so it makes the job very easy, because especially when it's like a walk-in, then you're able to just get online and then speak to the client and go through forms. And if they have to sign anything, we have a Turkish family that we were able to provide case management services, legal services, and rapid rehousing. And then, as some of you might not know, rapid rehousing has a lot of forms and paperwork, and we're able to use the language line in order to communicate and translate all the documents for them in their in their native language, where they feel comfortable and they're able to freely express themselves. And immigration process is very also long and tedious. So being able to have that, it's a great resource for us.
That's awesome. Thank you.
And then these are some strategies for identifying some human trafficking. So because Again, traffickers can be anyone, and so can be a victim. Victim identification is one of the most challenging tasks for law enforcement and service providers, which is why a lot of the times they come through other ways, or other violations. For us here at CIRI, a lot of the referrals or disclosure comes through immigration, because they do come in for screening or consultation. And that's when, through that screening, that's when the trafficking situation is disclosed. But then for other organizations, I know it can come through, like for law enforcement, it comes through prostitution, domestic violence, child abuse, drug possession, maybe like a sexual abuse or neglect case. We're part of the multidisciplinary team here in Bridgeport. So during those meetings, we meet bi-weekly, and that's when cases are being reviewed. And we have law enforcement, we have the prosecutors, we have the forensic interviewers, we have DCF, we have the Center for Family Justice. So during those meetings, they're reviewing cases, and if we identify some of the trafficking concerns, then they're able to connect to services here at CIRI, whether it's for just case management, housing, or immigration. So being part of those bigger collaborative meetings is helpful, because that's when us as service providers can discuss certain concerns and then figure out what we can do as a team in order to provide the services to the client.
How do you work around any clients or families that might be afraid that if their information is shared in those types of meetings, that they're going to get like taken and moved out or deported, anything like that?
So in those meetings, we all sign a confidentiality form, and through the Center for Family Justice, which is they are the one that oversee the Bridgeport MDT meeting. But in terms of the cases that are being reviewed, the clients already received prior knowledge, and they sign all the disclosure forms and release of information. And then us as a MDT meeting are not able to really share outside of that group, unless we receive a separate release of information where the client knows, like, listen, I have to communicate with CCADV for these reasons. Are you able, if you give me permission, then you can sign off this release of information, and then we're able to share that. But everything that's being discussed in those meetings, the client is already aware of it, because of the forensic interview they went through before the case is being reviewed and discussed. Okay, now for the services that are available at CIRI, like I mentioned, I oversee the Project Rescue Department, which is a federally funded program providing services to all survivors of human trafficking throughout the state of Connecticut. Under that program, the ones working specifically, we have multiple grants. So everything is split depending on the type of grant that we have. So for Fairfield County, we have the OVC, which is Office for Victims of Crime. So we're able to provide a comprehensive case management to minor victims of trafficking in Fairfield County. We understand that there's not a lot of service providers in the state that provide trafficking services, specifically immigration legal services. So we're able to actually branch out of Fairfield County if needed, or we need to ask this permission from our funders and say, you know, we have a minor who is in Hartford, and we need to provide this service for them because there's nothing that we can refer to. So under that grant is for minor victims. Then we have TVAP, which is Trafficking Victim Assistance Program, funded through a USCRI. And for that one, we're able to provide comprehensive case management to foreign-born survivors in Hartford and New Haven County. And that is TVAP for adults, and then Aspire is for the minors. And then we have Rapid Rehousing, which is all clients who are fleeing or attempting to flee trafficking. And for that one, is statewide. And then under those programs, again, comprehensive case management looks very different. Our goal is to help the survivor achieve self-sufficiency so that they feel empowered to access community resources independently. So when the case manager meets with the client for the first time to complete the intake, part of that intake is to go through a self-sufficiency plan. And then we talk about long-term and short-term goals. because we do work with a lot of undocumented clients. One of their main goals is usually establishing or connecting to a medical care provider because they haven't had like a physical, a dental checkup, or they're not connected to mental health services. So the case manager tries to connect with like a community health center where they can maybe do like a sliding fee scale. And then if the client doesn't have insurance, then we're able to then provide financial assistance under the program to assist with those appointments. And then if they might be able to apply for benefits. So if they're undocumented for minor victims, they can receive an eligibility letter through the Department of Health and Human Services. And then that allows them to apply for services to the same extent as a refugee. So then we're able to then help them apply for health insurance, food stamp, cash assistance, and so forth. For an adult survivor, it's a little bit more complicated because they would have to wait until their T visa is approved, like the trafficking visa. And once they're approved, then they can receive a certification letter to apply for benefits. I believe that's going to be changing though. As of August, there's a T visa final rule, so they might be able to receive these services prior to the approval because they recognize that the immigration process is very lengthy. And for adult victims, they're waiting until their immigration status gets approved before they can receive any benefits, get their work permit, social. And now with this change, which has been great, then we're able to get all that for them while they're waiting for their application to be approved.
How difficult is the threshold to be able to get the TV approved?
So I guess I've been here for 5 years. Before my time, I guess it was taking around 6 months.
Okay.
Now the processing time is 16.5 months.
Wow.
So when we have a client that we're working, that we have them in rapid rehousing and they're undocumented and they're waiting for their T visa, we're very lucky that we're able to extend them in rapid rehousing up to 24 months and hope that while they're being housed and receiving services, they can get their T visa approved. But those clients that are just, let's say, starting now, they know that for the next year and a half, they won't receive any work authorization documents, no social, and they're not able to apply for any benefits. So it's very lengthy. And then in order for them to be eligible for the T visa, it has to have, the trafficking had happened in the United States. It couldn't be like in home country or en route. It has to be in the United States. So sometimes we have clients that it happened outside of the US, so they wouldn't be eligible to apply for that relief. But there might be other relief that they can apply for. So we always just advise them to still meet with an attorney and do the screening to see if they can maybe apply for something else, because there's the U visa, which processing time for that one is way longer. And there's a backlog of that. So right now it's like, I believe like 36 months that's taken for the U visa.
Wow.
And then there's continued presence that they can maybe apply for, which grants them temporary status while they're like working with law enforcement on the trafficking investigation. And that basically gives them status for 2 years while they then work for something more permanent, like the T visa for the 3 years, and then a green card, like lawful permanent residency. But for continued presence, since the time I've been here, only the cases in Hartford, some of them were granted, and that's because it requires the FBI to be involved and petition for continued presence and the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Is there any cost affiliated with getting services from you?
So for case management services, there is no cost. In immigration, it depends where the client is located. If it's a minor victim in Fairfield County, under OBC, we can provide immigration legal services for free under that grant. Unfortunately for TVAP, they only provide case management services. They don't provide financial assistance for immigration. But we still recommend the client to get connected to an attorney. And then if there's concerns about not having the funds to pay, then the attorney can also talk about maybe doing like waivers through immigration, where they can waive some of those legal fees. And then we also try to then refer out to like pro bono or low bono attorneys that can help the client with their immigration case.
Thanks. There is one question in the chat. It says, what step should follow when the undocumented is forcing his partner to get married to obtain legal status, but the victim does not want to report it?
Yeah, so let me see if I understand. So the client is, or the partner is forcing the victim to get married to obtain legal status.
Yes.
I think the first step is reporting that to, or like maybe go into a consultation.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry, that was me. I
yeah, you
actually
can-
just wanna tell you just a little. I don't wanna hold you up. So I'm a wedding official, and last week I was supposed to officiate a wedding, but I realized that the person that was getting married was being forced by her partner. Um, I tried to help her to connect it with DBCC, but she didn't want to. I just went to the police and reported it. That's all I could do because she didn't want to go. So he's the undocumented. He's the one forcing her. He has her passport. He's been abusing her physically, but she didn't want to step to to do anything. So that was the only thing I could do.
Mhm.
And the police told me to, not be in contact with them after that, after I reported everything.
Yeah, it goes back to what Jasmine was mentioning
Yeah.
about safety planning. Because again, she's being forced to marry the perpetrator, but then we can't force her to receive services. So it kind of like puts you as an advocate or case manager in a difficult situation.
Very frustrating.
Yeah, I was gonna say, those are the situations I think we come across sometimes where you want to do the right thing, you want to help people. Unfortunately, it takes to when they're ready. That's all you can do is provide the information in a safe way, whether it's just call me when something comes up, coming up with like a safety word, or have a safety word with a friend or a family member. But again, you can't tell someone they're a victim.
Yeah,
They
and
have to be ready.
keep track of all the, like if there's like messages, like kind of like any interaction of abuse, like document all that as well. Maybe until whenever she's ready, then she can use it. So if there's like messages, pictures, or anything that she can document or write down.
Yeah, the only thing is I spoke to the city hall because that happened in Norwalk, and I spoke to the city hall registered person and I let them know about the situation. So they agree that whenever this person gets married with someone else, they're not gonna make it valid because the person is being forced. But besides that, there is nothing else, they couldn't do. But you know, at least the report is there,
Yeah,
and that's all I could do for them.
You did what you could.
but thank you.
Right. Yeah.
God, that's tough. You guys have some hard work. I gotta say, housing is tough, but what you guys do, it's commendable that you're able to do this day in and day out.
Yes. And then, yeah, so I just wanted to touch in terms of the, for Project Rescue, they just have to meet the federal definition for victim of severe form of trafficking. But we can initiate services if there's any like red flags or indicators of trafficking, until they can meet with the attorney for screening. And then for rapid rehousing, as Jasmine mentioned, and they just have to meet Category 4 definition of homelessness, which is fleeing or attempting to flee trafficking for our program specifically. And it doesn't have to be that they're literally homeless. It could be that they're just wanting to get out of their situation. And then this is just our referral form. It's just 2 pages, and it's just to gather basically demographic information in order to figure out which program they can fall under, based on their location, their age. If you're unsure what type of trafficking it is, there's a box here that says unknown. And then that just alerts me that they have to be screened in order to figure out if it's sex, labor, or both. And then if, same for like immigration status, is just to know if they need to be connected to an attorney for immigration services. And then if you suspect that is a minor that you encounter that's a victim of trafficking, always call the DCF care line just to file that report with them as well. And then besides CIRI, I just wanted to put some numbers here and information who else can help victims of trafficking. If you do call the National Trafficking Hotline number or text it just to ask questions, or if you're unsure, they can always walk you through it. For Connecticut, they will most likely connect you back to us. So if you just want to skip that and just reach out to me directly, or do you have any questions, you feel free to email me or call me. And that's pretty much it for me. If you guys have any other questions that we can cover.
Any questions? It's a lot of information that was shared today.
I don't have a question, but I just want to say thank you very much, ladies. You did a great job. I work with Jasmine and with Genesis, and it's been a pleasure, and I learned a lot in that process. How are you?
Yes.
Like I said, it's huge learning. So thank you for all this information today. It's been a lot. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Khadija, for all your work. I know our clients can be a little bit challenging sometimes.
Thank you, Genesis and Jasmine. This was fantastic. Very rich information, lots of good conversation as well. As a reminder to everyone that is here, if you are here under a name that is not your own, please just put your email in the chat so that I have you as part of my distribution list. If you registered and your name is the way that it is, I already have you on my list. So you will receive copies of the slides from today, as well as a copy of the recording, which will be linked to our YouTube channel. And then anything that is shared via email to you guys in that way will also be shared via Roundtable, so that additional staff can take a look at this today and take advantage as well. If anyone has any other additional questions, information, something that you missed, or a burning question that you thought of once we've departed today, you can also email me, Lindsay with an A, at thehousingcollective.org, and I will make sure that Genesis and Jasmine have access to that. Seeing no other questions, I'm going to go ahead and end the recording and wish all of you a wonderful day. Jasmine, Genesis, thank you for your time today. It was very much appreciated.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank